Works on the order too. The order of the speakers tonight was determined by this coin toss in the hallway. There were accountants there, I assure you. and you, Keith, will get to go first tonight. You won, so you'll get to go first tonight. Each candidate will give an opening statement of 5 minutes. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. After both candidates have responded to the question, the candidates will be permitted a 1-minute rebuttal, but there are no rebuttals to the rebuttal. And at the conclusion of the audience questions, I'll ask a question, then each candidate will be permitted 1 minute to pose a question to their opponent, who will then have 3 minutes to respond. Each candidate then will give a 5-minute closing statement. And that's it. That's the whole thing. So let's give them one more applause so we can get it out of our system. And it's a photographer's dream because they're going to have to keep stepping up and sitting down and stepping up and sitting down. But we did it before. We can get through it. Keith, you're up.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here with all of you tonight. Because I'm not well known, I thought I'd give you a little bit of my biography. Grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Son of a Navy family. Many of you I know also share that. My dad was last stationed down there. And as a young man in high school, the only 2 things I cared about were football and this young sweetheart I had fallen in love with. And I had a lot of football offers to play in college, but I decided to go to William & Mary because, number 1, pro football was not terribly likely, and number 2, I knew I could get a great education. Number 3, I knew I could stay in touch with her. As it turns out, I majored in accounting at William & Mary, and I actually captained the football team. And the last time William & Mary beat Virginia Tech, Virginia, and Navy, oh yeah, I was there. And it was great. It was absolutely wonderful. Had a tryout with the Cleveland Browns after college, and you can't tell good luck from bad luck at the time. I pulled a hamstring after having a 60-yard game against the Giants, and that was it for my career. My grandma always said things work out for the best, and as disappointed as I was then, they have, because I'm relatively healthy now, and a lot of the football friends I played with are not. But after football, I joined Pete Marwick, the accounting firm, where I worked for 7 years. Was very fortunate to have been promoted early a couple times, and I did a rotation in the firm's executive offices in New York City, which was a great plum. But I got familiar with corporate relocation when my boss's boss took me to Boston with him, and it was there that I stopped liking accounting so much anymore. And my dad always said, if you don't love what you do, you better stop doing it because you'll be a prisoner to it. My wife wanted to get back to Virginia, and we moved to the Northern Virginia area 22 years ago. I started my company around that time in a room above a garage. And for a year and a half, we didn't draw salaries. I remember describing to someone, I feel like I'm sawing the branch of the tree I'm sitting on. The tree is that way, and I'm looking down, and it was a long drop. I would have lost everything, my house and everything. And I was more worried about losing my house because my wife would have killed me. But it was she, that high school sweetheart of mine, that I ended up marrying. We were blessed with 3 lovely daughters. One, the oldest is in Manhattan working at J.P. Morgan. The other 2 in college. My youngest is at William & Mary swimming, so I'm very proud of that. So I'm a CPA, an entrepreneur, an inventor. My company, we ended up getting 73 separate patent claims under a single patent application for the radon detection and measurement machinery that we designed and built. We actually designed one of the 2 onboard computers as well. But as an entrepreneur and a businessman and a former CPA, I have no vested interest. I'm not here to hide the truth from you. I'm here because our country needs businessmen and women in Congress to control spending and bring common sense business practices to government. People have said, why in the world are you running for office? And quite honestly, I'm doing this because I'm fearful that if business people are not involved, this country will not be for our kids and our grandkids what it was for us. I look at Congress and I see people yelling at each other and getting nothing done. And I say to myself, you know, in business, if you yelled at each other and didn't do anything, you'd go out of business. You've got to accomplish things. So even though I may not be 100% happy with the transaction, if I'm 70% there and so is the other company, we do a deal. Because the overall good is what's more important than being 100% happy about something. A great example, this is energy today. On one side, you've got the Democrats saying renewable. The Republicans are saying drill. I'm saying let's do both. We need to do both. We need to be responsible here. And someone needs to say this. So maybe that someone should be me. And that's why I decided to throw in. Business people make for solutions, folks. We work hard to find solutions. And it's one of the important reasons I'm running. Whether you're Republican or Democrat, we're all Americans. We need solutions to these very vexing problems that we face. I'll sum it up this way. The average federal debt, federal liabilities, and unfunded obligations per American family today are a staggering $455,000. If you were asked to pay an extra $1,000 on your tax return, you would howl in protest, just as I would. It's not fair, it's not right, it's not just, it's not. But we are building bridges to no place, running up debt for our kids that cannot be sustained. This debt will have to be paid. And it is a very, very, very serious matter. And it must be addressed soon rather than later. And that's why I've decided to run for public office. With my credentials as a CPA and my 21 years in business, learning how to do more with less, I hope to bring to the Congress an approach that changes things in a way that will allow our country to leave our children what we had growing up. Thank you very much.
All right, Jerry.
Good evening, and it's great to be back here at the Committee of 100. I spoke to this committee a couple of years ago on education. I'm also joined tonight by my wife, Kathy, and my daughter, Caitlin. Please give them a Prince William County. They're very supportive in this effort. It's okay, even if you're wearing a Fimian sticker, you can still applaud my wife and daughter. You know, I love local government. It keeps you very humble. And I'm looking at my daughter. When she was in the 4th grade, I was invited to come and speak to her class. And I must say, I gave a stem winder of a speech to that class. I spoke about the Dillon Rule. I spoke about the delicate balance between taxation and the provision of services. I spoke about the growing cultural divide between Northern Virginia and the rest of Virginia. And I wound up with great panache, and I got very polite applause from that 4th grade. With one exception, there was one little girl with her arms akimbo and a big scowl on her face, like some people in the audience here. And I went up to her and I said, "You didn't like my speech?" She said, "No, I thought it was boring." And to comfort me, my daughter came running up and said, "Oh, Dad, don't listen to her. She just repeats what everyone else says." So being in local government keeps you humble. But I'll tell you why I love local government, because at this level, we have to deliver. This is the level of government where the bloviation stops and results and effects kick in. And that has given me a passion in the 14 years I've been in public life. And that's a passion I want to bring to Washington, because it's a passion that is clearly lacking in the Congress of the United States. We have grown used, unfortunately, to a federal government that does not work, whether it be No Child Left Behind, whether it be the FAA forgetting to inspect hundreds of American airline planes, whether it be the FDA forgetting to inspect toxic pharmaceuticals coming in from China, or the tragedy of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, not being able to respond in an effective way when human lives were at stake in New Orleans. None of us as Americans should settle for that. That federal government, we pay our taxes, the deal is the government ought to work. It ought to be there when we need it. And we need people who have experience in making government work in the United States Congress. The other passion I have is also in foreign policy. I've got 25 years of experience in foreign policy, both in international business in the last 20 years, and 10 years in the United States Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I specialized in the Middle East. I wrote a lot of legislation and foreign assistance for the United States Senate, and I have seen the United States' credibility and reputation damaged overseas. Anyone who's traveled has encountered it, even in friendly countries. We have to turn that around. It is important that the last remaining superpower in this country be engaged, whether it be in North Korea, whether it be in the Middle East. We are the last superpower, and we must be the fair arbiter of international disputes. Only the United States can deliver on that. And sadly, we've seen a policy of unilateralism, preemption, and in some cases, frankly, disengagement until very recently, especially in danger spots like North Korea and the Middle East. We can't afford to have the United States be disengaged. So I want to bring that passion for a government that gets things done, that produces results for its citizens. I'm proud in Fairfax County that we've been named the best managed county in the United States. I'm proud of the fact that all of our high schools, 24 of them, are in the top 3% in the United States. Last year, Thomas Jefferson was the #1 high school in the United States. I'm proud of the fact that we produced an economy that has 600,000 jobs. I'm proud of the fact that we last year had the highest median household income in the United States. Now this year, we've slipped to #2. And Loudoun beat us this year. Now, I don't know. Prince William and Fairfax, we got to get together and figure out what the heck's going on in Loudoun. But anyway, getting results, insisting on measurable results, accountability, a government that works here and abroad. That's the passion I want to bring to the United States Congress. It's why I decided to give up local government, which is something I love, for the United States Congress, where I think we desperately need new leadership and change. Thank you very much for having me here tonight.
All right, gentlemen. Let's let the grilling begin, I guess. First question. In your opinion, what is the most important issue confronting the 11th Congressional District, and how would you go about addressing it? And we'll start with Keith again.
I would say the economy is the most important issue facing our district. We've got to make sure we keep our economy moving forward. The best way to do that is to make sure that taxes remain manageable. The best way to do that is to make sure that we control spending. Folks, regardless of your passion for a particular job, if you don't have the right skills to manage that job, passion doesn't matter. The truth in Fairfax County is that we've got a $430 million deficit before us for just one county, for just 1 year. That is a staggering amount of money. It's hard even to believe. But in business, you always plan for the scary stuff. You're always looking over your shoulder so you don't get whacked by a company coming up behind you. We don't have that approach in government. If we don't plan, then, oh, we got to raise taxes. Couldn't have planned for that. Well, that's not the case in the private sector. If you're $30 million over budget in the private sector, you lose your job. Under the worst circumstances, you're $100 million over, try explaining that to your board of directors. You lose your job. You don't get a promotion. The economy is critical, and to have the economy grow, we have got to make sure that we've got people in office who understand the economy and economic growth. And that is one of the things that I bring to the table in this district. We can, by growing our economy, help ourselves out of the serious hole we've dug ourselves into, which today, the summary of that, $455,000 per American family is a $53 trillion federal liability and unfunded obligations. It's a gigantic number. Our whole economy is only $13 trillion. So to have any hope of being able to deliver on what we've already promised, we've got to grow this economy. And we've got to have people in place, completely new leaders, to do this, that understand what has to be done so that the economy can grow. Thank you.
Well, you know, I think Mr. Fimian is not familiar with how local governments work. The fact of the matter is every single government in metropolitan Washington, including Prince William County, is looking at projected shortfalls because, not because of mismanagement, because of plummeting revenues, primarily because of the policies of the national administration that led to the subprime mortgage crisis. This is the same crowd that has driven the United States economy into a ditch. 6.1% unemployment and growing. The largest single federal deficit in history, doubling of the federal debt. Keith talks about the burden on individuals. Yes, doubled on the last 8-year watch. His party. Yeah, we need change, all right. And if we needed a reminder of how much change we need, we saw the dramatic results this week. 2 of the remaining 4 investment houses on Wall Street went under. The largest single insurance company in the United States had to be bailed out by your and my tax dollars. I don't think that's a conservative fiscal policy. And if that's what business leaders bring us, and let's remember 8 years ago, that's what we were told. We elected 2 people who touted their business credentials. Well, they've led us to one of the biggest financial meltdowns since the Great Depression. the worst housing crisis since the Great Depression, and the largest single debt the United States has ever carried, even during time of world wars. I don't think that's a policy I'd be proud of. It's not something I want to see more of in Washington. I think we do need a change.
Folks, this is a great example of blaming someone else. The truth is we have a $430 million deficit in Fairfax County. However that happened, my point is simply that businesses plan for exactly this. We are always planning for the scary stuff. You're always looking over your shoulder. It is utterly irresponsible. In fact, it's more than negligent, it's grossly negligent, it's incompetence not to plan for what's happened, regardless of how it happened, regardless from whence it came. My point is that this is precisely what businesses do. You're always planning for the what-ifs. You're always wargaming it so that these things don't happen, or so that if they do happen, you're prepared for them. And my company has had 21 years of balancing budgets and making sure that we are planning for the tough stuff. It's hard running a company that is national in scope, but we plan all the time, and that has got to be done in government, and it's not being done. And the idea of passing the buck, as we're seeing here, is the routine.
First of all, there is no deficit, and maybe Mr. Fimian does not know that under state law in Virginia, our budgets must be balanced. We don't get the privilege of printing money like the federal government. And so I presided over 14 consecutive balanced budgets in the 14 years I've served on our local board. But every local government is suffering. Prince William County is looking at as perhaps as much as a $500 million shortfall. Does that mean the Republican chairman of this county is guilty of gross mismanagement? Just today in the Post, Loudoun County issued a warning that it's looking at a $176 million deficit, all of which, percentage-wise, are higher than the one projected in Fairfax. It's not a deficit, Keith. We're in a balanced budget right now. It is a projected revenue shortfall if we don't change things. And that's why in my county we've begun a process to identify reductions in county spending that will be in place by the time we adopt a budget in April, a balanced budget. That is good management, not bad management. It's not passing the buck on to anyone. It's taking responsibility and doing the right thing.
All right, guys, in my line of work, this is what we call a curveball. And I'm going to add to it. The question is, what is your position on statehood for the District of Columbia, and how would you achieve it, or not achieve it, I guess, if you oppose it? But I guess the question that I would add to it is, what impact would statehood have on the 11th Congressional District? And you're up first.
Well, to answer the second part of your question first, the concern I think all of us in Northern Virginia would have about statehood is the imposition of a commuter tax. And that's something simply we're not going to accept. With respect to D.C.'s voting rights, I believe D.C. is entitled to voting rights, just like any other city in the United States. It is the only enclave in the United States that has been denied voting representation. That's un-American. It's wrong. When the Constitution was originally written and that was written into it, D.C. didn't exist. It was pasture. It hadn't even, nothing had been. It's now a thriving city with almost 600,000 people. They deserve to have a vote in the United States Congress just as we do here in the 11th Congressional District of Virginia.
The District of Columbia and its inhabitants, I agree, should have a right to vote. Our founders are very smart people, and they put together a very good constitution. For reasons they had then, they chose not to allow residents of the district to vote. Things have changed, times have changed, but I don't agree that we need to create a state with the District of Columbia. Though I do agree having the ability to vote would be something I'd like to have if I lived in the district.
I think we agree.
I think that would,
Who's keeping tabs?
I just deliver them. Number 3, what can be or should be done, if anything, to improve U.S. intelligence effectiveness? A lot of complaints about that. And we'll start with you, Keith.
Our freedoms are threatened, our prosperity is threatened. Our freedoms are threatened by forces external to us. And the United States must maintain a military that is second to none in the world, with intelligence capabilities to go with it. We live in a profoundly dangerous place today, people. We have an open southern border that if someone wanted to smuggle a nuke across, I don't know how it could be stopped. Because of the threats that we face and because of those who live outside of our borders, so many that want to see our destruction, we've got to make sure that our intelligence capabilities allow us to determine where these threats are and when they become serious enough to interdict. The first duty of government is our defense. So whatever the cost, whatever it takes, I think we've got to be responsible in this sense and make sure that we are able to defend our citizenry, being the primary responsibility. I just wanted to return to the original topic because a projected revenue shortfall is as good as a deficit where I come from. $430 million is nothing to shake a stick at. When you've got to cut services 15% or some such number because you've not planned for what's taking place, I think that's a relevant issue, and I simply wanted to call that to your attention. I don't think this is good management, not bad management, as my opponent has said.
Well, I think the question had to do with intelligence and what we need to do to improve United States intelligence. You know, essentially you can divide intelligence into two kinds. One is technological, where the United States has superior capabilities, much of it classified, but clearly the United States has the ability through very advanced technology to listen in, to photograph, to size up a situation with great accuracy. But where we're sometimes weak is what's called human intelligence. And the reason for that is because we have fallen behind in recruiting folks, in language ability. You know, the whole U.S. intelligence structure for 40 years, 50 years, was built on the assumption that the Soviet Union, largely Russian-speaking, was the enemy and always would be, and so we knew what to do about that. And we had a lot of Russian-speaking experts in our intelligence community. Today, the threats are much more disparate, and we lack the requisite language-speaking human sources sometimes, especially, let's take Arabic as one of them. So recruiting folks who can help us with human intelligence and making sure we've got networks around the world, especially in trouble spots. Hard to get into North Korea, hard to get into Iran, but we have a job to do. If we're going to make this a safer world and protect U.S. security on this question, intelligence, not a question yet of border security or defense, I think we have to focus, especially because we're doing a good job on the first kind of intelligence. We have more work to do on the second kind if we're going to protect the United States security in the post 9/11 world.
You get 1 minute if you so wish. You get a rebuttal. No?
I think this one's pretty interesting, actually, because I think we're in maybe the most historic election of my time, at least the most interesting. And there's a lot of talk about how both these guys at the top of the tickets aren't being very specific. Both. So, what programs or agencies would you cut from the federal government, and why?
We'll go first. Jerry goes first.
Well, I don't know. I haven't sat down and said, I'm going to cut all of these agencies, because we're looking right now at a situation where actually we have to add capacity. I would revamp the SEC. I would insist on regulation of the insurance industry, which doesn't exist right now. I would insist on federal regulation of investment banks, because you've just seen what happens when we don't have that capacity. So I think we have to look at that. Clearly, every program in the federal budget has to be looked at carefully for both, is it effective and is it cost effective? And we could all have our favorites. But one thing we do know is that we have to get our arms around the federal deficit, which is projected to be almost $500 billion this year. And I think we have to do that by, frankly, revising the tax cuts of the Bush administration, largely that went to the wealthy and are bleeding us dry in terms of red ink. And we have to bring the Iraq engagement to a close so that we're not spending $12 billion a month on that adventure. And I would also insist that Iraq take responsibility for its own reconstruction. Iraq has $80 billion of oil surplus revenue, and we're paying for its reconstruction, you and I, while our federal government is hemorrhaging money. So I'd start there and start to work down in terms of agencies.
Folks, the current spending of the federal government is so out of control that every single thing we do must be looked at very, very carefully. We have got to eliminate every single duplicate program that exists. We've got to eliminate earmarks insofar as they're not transparent. Earmarks are okay if you have them attached to a bill before the bill is voted on, so that constituents can see, so that voters can see what's being voted on. Now, what I would like to see is an internet-based secure system that every earmark comes into your congressional office with an N next to it. And you have to affirmatively change it to a Y to vote in favor of it. And everyone knows this before the bill is voted on. We are building bridges to no place. Some earmarks are good. Route 123, the Mixing Bowl, the Wilson Bridge, there are some that are very worthwhile. But there are many that are useless. And we have got to control spending. So, that said, there are many ways to reduce spending. And the principle of subsidiarity here, I think, should be observed, in that the idea of pushing down to the local level, the decisions that need to be made at that local level should be made by local people. Without getting into specifics about which department here, what group there, we've got to look at everything we're doing. And we've got to recognize that only the government can build the F-16s and certain things that only the federal government can do. But we've got to recognize that the only thing the government can afford to do any longer are the essentials. It is that serious a problem. We have got to control spending now, or we threaten these children of ours and the generations to come, because someone has to pay back the debt that we are ringing up right now.
An example of federal intentions gone awry, in my mind, that costs us money is No Child Left Behind. Because what got left behind was the money. Here in local government, we end up subsidizing a federal mandate. In my view, if I'm going to be your congressman, I'm not going to vote for unfunded federal mandates. If we think it's a good idea at the federal level, then we need to pay for it. In my jurisdiction, every year we're spending $17 million, almost 1 penny on the tax rate, of local tax dollars because we are required by law to implement No Child Left Behind. Here in Prince William County, I don't know what it is, John, but it's probably $5 or $6 million. That's wrong. That is wrong. And so if we're going to look for programs to eliminate, unless they're willing to put up the cash, I'd certainly look at unfunded mandates as well, because they are doing a lot of damage and putting a lot of pressure on local governments. And I agree, and I'm glad to hear Keith say what he said. Let's push down responsibilities to the local level. I'm all for that, so long as, if that comes with a mandate, it comes with money.
Jerry, wait, before you go, would you get rid of No Child Left Behind?
If No Child Left Behind cannot be repaired, and I'll give you three repairs. One is the money.
Quick.
Secondly, they have to take into account and be more flexible with large, diverse school systems such as ours in Northern Virginia. They don't do that. And thirdly, they can't be as rigid about putting the stigma of failure in a school for a small subset. If they don't fix those three things, I will vote against the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind.
My timer friends compensate Keith. Oh, very cool.
When we look at spending, I think it's relevant that we look at the spending here locally. And comparing Fairfax County to Prince William and Loudoun has relevance insofar as it goes. But I'd like to point out there are many things that have got to be cut at the local level as well, in addition to the federal. By here I'm talking about this program in Fairfax where we are buying apartment buildings and with the right intention, good intention of leasing them to people who couldn't afford to live in those places, paying normal rent. But it's a foolish way to go about doing things. It's just bigger government, and it's unnecessary. Why should government buy real estate, become a speculator in real estate, have to hire people to maintain the buildings, have to hire people to make sure who's moving in, that they're moved in, et cetera, et cetera? It'd be much easier, much more simple to simply have a program where you identify the people that should be subsidized and give them a rent subsidy check. It's just that simple. We are making government bigger and bigger, and this is an example in Fairfax County where we've got to reduce the size of government. We are threatening ourselves, and to have a program like this is a great example of waste.
I think we're sort of running quick on time, and I have a lot of questions here, so I sort of, and the question, people hate me for this, but I sort of jumbled the questions so we could get some local ones in. What would you specifically do to relieve anticipated traffic congestion? I think this one's a really good one. In the 11th Congressional District, as a result of the BRAC implementation. What can you as congressman do to improve that situation, or at least get ahead of it? And yours first, Keith. Route 1's already a mess, guys. You know that. So,
well, given BRAC and the fact that the federal government is doing this relocation, I think it's important that the federal government provide relief for these roads. But as far as transportation goes, let me make a general point, because as a common sense businessman, I don't understand why traffic is managed as it is. And I think this may come from Richmond, but the fact is you've got available space in lanes. If you go to LA, the 5 and the 10 are used left to right. There's no emergency lane. Why not put a big red X above a lane if a car is broken down in that lane, and otherwise it's a big green arrow? If you got to slow traffic to 45 or even 35 to keep traffic moving because the volume's so heavy, slow traffic down. Have adjustable speed limits so that you keep traffic moving. These are not terribly novel ideas, but they're common sense enough that I don't know why we haven't done them. If the rush hour lane is safe during rush hour, why isn't it safe the rest of the time, on weekends, for example? So just using common sense ideas and making good use of the space we've got, seems to me, would relieve traffic congestion a great deal. My company, US Inspect, won an award for $35,000 for telecommuting. And the way the program works, it's Telework Virginia, but you have people working from home. With the internet and big wires coming into your house, there's no reason people can't work from home to relieve traffic congestion. It's a wise way to go. It's something that's being used extensively in the private sector. It's something that we've taken advantage of, and frankly, my employees at US Inspect, I've resigned from the company, but the employees at US Inspect are far more productive when they work at home. It's a great advantage because you're relieving traffic congestion, energy consumption, stress. You're spending more time with your family. There's a myriad of advantages. And these sorts of things need to be studied in that Route 1 corridor in particular.
Well, I'm glad to hear my opponent and his position on telework, because we share that. I won the Skull Award here in the metropolitan Washington area for my leadership, actually, in telework as the chairman of the Council of Governments. I've been a big champion of it, and I have insisted that Fairfax County achieve a goal of 20% of our eligible workers teleworking, and we reached that goal, and we're helping the environment. But the question was on specifically, what would you do as a member of Congress to improve to try to address the impacts BRAC has created both in Fairfax and Prince William counties. In Fairfax County, we're adding 19,500 jobs at Belvoir. Here at Quantico, 4,000 or 5,000 jobs, John, right?
3,000.
3,000. That brings traffic. We're the only place in the country that actually said to the Army and to BRAC, when they talked about bringing jobs to the area, we went, really? You sure? Because the first thing all of us as Northern Virginians think of is traffic. The federal government hasn't put up one dime to address the impacts, the traffic impacts of these decisions, profound decisions in our region. Fairfax County and the state of Virginia are paying for the completion of the Fairfax County Parkway. The state of Virginia is paying for certain lane improvements on 995, and that's it. That's not good enough. We need to add rail stations at Belvoir and at the EPG. We need to bring, in my view, rail down the I-95 corridor to Potomac Mills. We need to be looking at getting federal impact aid, both in education and transportation, to address the real impacts the federal government has had on our community. We want to support their mission, but we don't want it to be at our local taxpayer expense or our state expense. We can't afford it. We need federal dollars, and the next congressman has to fight for that.
The other thing I think we could do is use the Potomac River, which is apparently 100 lanes wide. It's so big that you could literally funnel with ferries many people into Washington. But I want to call your attention to something else, which is Tyson's Corner. Traffic there is no fun. We commuted from there tonight, and it's really no fun. But it's very difficult for all of us. We know that traffic is a lifestyle matter for many families. My opponent wants to turn Tyson's Corner into the next Manhattan by having the developers be rewarded for their multiple hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to his campaign. I don't think that's right. $5,000 or $10,000, $15,000 to a campaign in total from developers, fine. But hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars so that the big payback can come, which is what's coming now, I don't think is right. Mr. Connolly's own staff has told him, wait, let the study be completed. We simply do not want to have the kind of traffic here that we're talking about.
I don't know what my opponent was just talking about, but since we're talking about Tyson's, I've been a great champion of rail to Dulles. Rail to Dulles is going to create a transit-oriented corridor, which is what I've championed. And oh, by the way, it isn't the developers who've endorsed my candidacy in this race. Every single environmental group that endorses has endorsed me for this congressional race. The Sierra Club, the League of Conservation Voters, Clean Water Action Program. They've endorsed me because I support environmentally sound approaches to change the patterns of growth and development so that we concentrate growth and development around transit nodes instead of the sprawl that has produced the congestion you and I have to live with every day. Tyson's gives us the opportunity because rail is coming. I've been proud to work on a bipartisan basis with Frank Wolf, with John Warner, with Governor Kane, and before him, Governor Mark Warner, to bring rail to Tyson's. And I'm proud as heck of the fact that 3 weeks ago, this administration, the federal administration, reversed itself and has given us permission to begin construction in Tyson's of that project.
Let me say, I'm enjoying this. You guys are answering questions. I'm not accustomed to that. I think this is a federal issue that has, certainly here, become a local issue. And I think your answer to this question says, not that you have a say in what's happened here, but says something about you, who you are, and what kind of leader you are. Are you pleased with how Prince William County has addressed its undocumented immigrants issue? I wonder, there's more to this question written here, but that's all I really want to hear. I think that pretty much sets it in stone. So, who's first? It's you this time.
As a local leader, responsible for the largest local government in Virginia, I believe firmly that this is another example of the federal government having completely collapsed in its response. You know, I begin this subject first abilities and basically trying to slough them off on us locally. We can't at a local level. We're building roads and bridges. We're educating kids. We're providing public safety. We can't take on the burden of 12 million undocumented aliens in our midst. That is a federal responsibility, and the immigration system is broken from top to bottom. Now, in my community, the approach we've taken is to focus on illegal behavior. I formed a county strike force that has cracked down on over 200 homeowners who are guilty of illegal overcrowding and the creation of illegal boarding houses. And we put some people in jail. I've focused on gang prevention and intervention, and we've made some significant progress in getting some bad people out of our community and sending them back where they came from, and in reducing the incidence of gangs in our community. And thirdly, we're involved, as we are required by state and federal regulation and law, in the denial of services. There are well over 36 services that require proof of legal residence, and we're cooperating with that. And finally, our sheriff, long before other local jurisdictions, has been cooperating with ICE in handing over undocumented individuals and illegal aliens guilty or suspected of crimes to the immigration, what is now called ICE, the Immigration Service, for them to handle those cases. But we need the federal government to completely overhaul the immigration system, from enforcement to how people come legally into this country, for that system to work and to take the burden off those of us in local government and our taxpayers.
What was the specific question?
Are you pleased with how Prince William County has addressed its undocumented immigrants issue?
Prince William County felt it necessary to address this issue a couple of years ago because of the problems that they were having. These problems now find themselves in Fairfax County in greater numbers than had been previously. Crime is up in Fairfax County 30%. In addition, I walked Springfield, neighborhoods there, and I was alarmed to see how concerned ordinary citizens were in their own homes because of the boarding homes around them. Folks, these are fraternity houses for crime gangs. I mean, these are not good places. It's not something you want to have in your neighborhood, and it's all fine in the ethereal when it's somebody, when it's happening out there. Yeah, we should do something about it. When it's in your neighborhood, it's a whole lot different. And the problem here reached a point where the board felt action was necessary and action was taken. The school classroom sizes are up nearly 10% in Fairfax County this year, and teachers, I've done a lot of back-to-school nights, are up in arms because of this. Because their classrooms are bigger, they're not getting paid anymore, it's more demanding of them. So there's a lot of implications here, but the truth is there's a rule of law that's got to be observed in our country. Our country's built on the rule of law. And I'm not saying that we have to ship everyone home. I'm simply saying we need to know who's here. We need to know who's coming in. We need to make sure those who are here are paying taxes, learning the language, not committing crimes, and not collecting benefits.
Jerry?
Suddenly they don't want to talk. Sorry guys, it's just been really controversial here in Prince William County. I think we're all tired. No, just tired. This one I didn't know about, and I think it's very interesting. Local. Do you support the current proposal before Congress to force states, I'm not sure force is the right word, but force states to, well, yeah, it is, to force states to allow first responders to unionize? Please explain your answer.
There was a day and an age when unions made enormous sense. But many unions simply drive up the cost of doing business. Others don't, but the truth is it should be up to those in that profession whether or not they want to unionize or not. And there should be no force exerted on the part of the union to see the union occur with any given industry. The card check bill is a great example of what I'm talking about. When you vote to join a union or not, that is a private matter. It's a private vote. It is not something that should be coerced or forced. And what I want to make sure happens is that we don't have a situation where you have union members going into someone's living room threatening you to vote in favor of the union when you would prefer not to. The secret ballot is vital in the United States, and it's got to remain. Is that it? The secret ballot is vital. It's part of our heritage. It's part of who we are as a people. We've got to make sure that the secret ballot remains. And if you want to join a union and others in your profession choose to join a union and the majority prevails, fine. But it should not be something that is coerced or forced, and that's what card check does. It's a heavy-handed approach. because most organizations don't want to unionize.
Well, again, I think we've strayed from the question. The question was, would we support legislation that would force local governments,
Or
states, to allow
first responders to union.
to allow unionization? I don't think there is such legislation. I think there is legislation that would mandate the right of public safety workers, police primarily, to collective bargaining. He really is tired. And depending on the contours of the legislation, I'd be sympathetic to it because I've worked closely with the police. I want to make sure that their rights to organize, their rights to make sure that they have the benefits to protect themselves and their families are there when they need them. I had to go to 2 funerals 3 years ago in Fairfax County. The first 2 police officers killed in the line of duty in hostile gunfire. And I'll never forget the look in the faces of those children left behind and those widows left behind. And so I want to honor and protect those who honor and protect us in our community. And I think that's the intent of that legislation, not to force unionization on anyone, but to give them some collective bargaining rights they don't now have by entitlement. And I think that makes some sense, and I'd look favorably upon such legislation.
Okay.
We TV guys were good at blaming it on producers. This is going to be the last question from the. It is getting late. This is going to be the last question from the list, and then I'll have my question, and you guys can have your 2 questions, and we'll move on. But I think this one's important. What will you do to ensure that Social Security is solvent for not my grandchildren, somebody out there's grandchildren? I'm not quite there, but it, by the way, is supposed to go belly up right about the time. It's time for me to collect. And do you support providing civil union benefits? I'm not sure if that's under Social Security or, but that's all on the same question. We'll just nail you twice. You're first, or you're first? Jim.
Thanks for that last question, Matt. Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid account for 44% of all federal spending right now. If we don't do anything, within 20 years it's going to account for 75 to 80% of all federal spending. Add the debt service to the national debt that's doubled in the last 8 years, and you don't have a lot of room left over for much else in the federal budget. That's obviously an untenable situation. We have to, in my view, we have to keep the pledge we've made. Social Security is a sacred contract for current retirees and for future generations, such as yourself, Matt. So we have to make it solvent. And we have to do what we have to do to make sure that's true. There are lots of things we can do to make Medicare, for example, more effective. There are things we can do to make Social Security more effective. They're all going to be hard decisions. They're going to be decisions about, at what age will future generations retire? What will be the level of taxation in terms of withholding for Social Security? Those are not going to be easy decisions, but they are decisions that, if made on a bipartisan basis, as has been done in the past, we can guarantee the solvency of Social Security for future generations. It's not hard in terms of what the answers are. It is hard building the political will to do the right thing. And that's why you have to be able to reach across the aisle and build a bipartisan coalition on this subject. I would hope that the next Congress and the next administration would do that. They can't continue to duck this issue.
Folks, the answer to this issue is very, very hard. It's precisely the reason that I'm saying we have got to control spending. When Social Security was put in place, the retirement age was 65, just as it is. But the mortality rate was 55. And since then, a great deal has changed. The average American today in the United States lives 79.1 years. We've made solemn promises to people that they're counting on. And we have to fulfill these promises. We've got to make sure Social Security's on a sound footing moving forward. The only way to do this is to control federal spending. It is out of control. It is a threat to this nation. And it is why it's why I'm running for office, which, by the way, I never dreamed I would do. This was never part of my game plan. We have got to control spending. We've got to behave responsibly. Like any household, like any business, you got to balance your budget. A business doesn't balance its budget, it's out of business. Household doesn't balance its budget, you're eating hot dogs at the end of the month. The federal government is no different. Just because we've been borrowing at the rate we have for all these years doesn't mean we can or should continue to do it. In fact, we cannot continue to do it. But we've got to make sure we deliver on these promises people are counting on. How do you do that? You grow the economy, for one. You got to be very wise. We could kill the goose that lays the golden egg. And the fallout we're seeing on Wall Street is a consequence of many things, not the least of which is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac running out of control with an implicit government guarantee, inflating earnings so their executive teams could get bigger bonuses, and leading to giving millions of dollars to political candidates who are responsible for regulating these organizations, who turn a blind eye because they want to make sure they continue to receive these political contributions to their organization, to them, so they get reelected. We need to make sure government oversight is proper, but we've got to control spending to solve the Social Security problem.
Well, I would just remind you that, the best. I would agree that there were a lot of politicians who fed at the trough of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but the ultimate responsibility for the regulation and oversight of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac was with the Bush administration in the office called OFAO. That's the regulator of those two organizations. It's been asleep at the switch. Gazillions of U.S. tax dollars are going to now be used for a conservatorship to take over these two organizations because they hold 70% of all the mortgages in the United States. They're too big to fail. $85 billion on the Republican watch just went to bail out AIG. If you add up in this year the bill to bail out businesses that supposedly have all of this acumen in management, it's $816 billion and counting. Where has this Republican administration been? Why hasn't it been doing its job? And Congress's job is to make sure the administration does its job, and it's failed in this regard too.
The sophisticated financial instruments that exist on Wall Street today have largely gone unchecked. You've got unregulated investment banks, hedge funds, and in the case of insurance, which is regulated at the state level, you've got an inner working that has allowed us to experience what we've seen here recently. These problems, though, with Freddie and Fannie were identified 6 years ago, and identified clearly enough that this was predicted. Okay, there should be people in jail for this, in my opinion. Now, I don't have the details, I don't have all the facts, but the facts that I'm aware of suggest that you had vested interests protecting the chicanery that was going on that has allowed this to occur, and it never should have occurred. And it's the Congress that's responsible for this, not the President. The Congress has oversight, the Congress did not act, the Congress was getting the contributions from these organizations illicitly, or as the law allows, but they should not have been allowed to. And what I would suggest is no lobbying and no contributions for the resurrected organizations that will come out of this.
Boy, you guys know how to really ruin somebody's question. But I'm still going to go on with it because I was here late tonight because I couldn't help myself watching the world news tonight. Because the stock market today went up 410 points. Woo-hoo, we're all happy, right? But this is why. Because a rumor on the floor in Wall Street became reality. And tonight it is reality because on the Hill, congressional leaders, Democrats, and people from the Bush administration, Republicans, are meeting and making a deal to create an agency that, in the end, to essentially buy bad debt to the tune of $1 trillion. But that's not enough. Congressional leaders want to negotiate more. because they want another stimulus package to go along with that $1 trillion package. $150 million. Or $1 billion. $150 billion. On top of it, the last one was just $50 billion. Where are we? What we print? I got to get this deal going for me and print the money. And I print the money for what I want. But I think the point is that there's, and both of you took time blaming people, but the fact is, I think, both groups are culpable. Both parties are culpable. And I think that, I'm not sure this is the answer. Maybe it is the answer. I'm not sure. But I just can't imagine 1 trillion plus another 150 billion, and then what we've already spent bailing out companies. When does it stop? Where do you draw the line? I think that's what the question is. And am I wrong? Is everybody responsible, or just one guy, or both guys? I think that most people don't really know. Can you clear it up? Good luck with that. We'll start with Keith.
Organizations. Okay, the truth.
160-year-old institutions. No, there is no federal regulator for investment banks, period. So what kind of oversight was there going to be? And by the way, there are two parties in this country. One party tends to favor an unregulated market. Let the market work. Well, you see what happens when we have an unregulated market. The other party thinks we need some reasonable regulation to ensure the public safety, needs are met. And I happen to belong to that party, and I happen to believe this occasion underscores the desperate need we have for tight regulation and enforcement. And if that means some people go to jail, some people go to jail, of these markets. And that means investment houses, and that means insurance companies. It also means that we got to be looking at how mortgages were granted. I mean, if there are some people who should go to jail, it should be mortgage lenders who led people on. We're in Prince William County. There's no community in Virginia harder hit by the subprime mortgage crisis and the domino effect of that crisis than Prince William County. There's no community in Virginia that has a higher rate of foreclosures than Prince William County. So we know here in Northern Virginia, especially where we are right now, about the ravages of those decisions and their effects on human lives. And something has to be done about it. And I say strict enforcement, much tighter regulation, and more responsibility on the part of both the Congress and the administration.
It's not the mortgage lender's fault. They were operating within the parameters that were provided by Fannie and Freddie and other organizations that allowed these loans to take place. They were just doing what they were allowed to do. They shouldn't have been allowed to do it. The truth is, you didn't have enough oversight by the Congress because they were getting paid off with these campaign contributions. It's just that simple. They had no reason to provide the oversight that was so desperately needed. That again, 6 years ago, was indicated at that time. You also have the greed of Wall Street, quite frankly. You've got these very sophisticated financial instruments that are so sophisticated they're difficult to price, actually. And now these Wall Street firms are paying the price for their greed. What we don't need is another Sarbanes-Oxley. Okay, let me be very clear. We don't need government regulation that is so onerous and oppressive and overbearing that it suffocates an entire industry. Case in point, there are no initial public offerings made on the New York Stock Exchange any longer. They're done on the London Stock Exchange. We've decimated an entire industry because of government oversight that has suffocated. My company couldn't go public because of that, and it's a darn shame. But we've got to be smart in how we go about regulating business.
I'm really on top of things, right? They hired me at JLA for my keen observation skills. Now it's the time where you each ask each other a question, and I think that you're up first, right? Or you're up first. Who's next? You are. We'll go with Keith. Just go with me on it.
my question down. You'll forgive me here, but when 50 came, these came out. That's a joke. Okay, Fairfax County is now $430 million in the red, according to the Washington Post and your own budget office, Mr. Conley. You raised taxes on families suffering economically and increased spending like a drunken sailor. You failed as a county executive to simply manage a budget. Folks, this is serious. $430 million is nothing to sneeze at. The results have jeopardized Northern Virginia's economy and well-being. Why should people trust you with the federal budget when you've already proven you've failed to manage the county budget?
You know, Keith, I'm glad you asked the question, because in my 25 years of civic activism in my community, I've never once seen you at a public hearing. I've never once seen you give testimony about a budget that you now claim to care about. And clearly your lack of involvement in the community shows in asking this question. First of all, budgets in Virginia, according to our charter, must be provided by the county executive. And only when he presents a budget, it's his budget, does the county board of supervisors get to react. And then we adopt it and it becomes our budget. In the last 2 years, the average tax bill in my community went down. We were virtually the only jurisdiction in Northern Virginia who could say that. Every other jurisdiction in Northern Virginia virtually had to raise not only the tax rate, but the tax burden on its taxpayers, not Fairfax. Again, in the process of education, the $430 million referred to is a projected revenue shortfall, not a deficit, not red ink in the current budget. The current budget, like every single budget we've ever had, is balanced. The budget we adopt next April will also be balanced. Of course, I hope to be on the Hill when they do it. But it will also be balanced. What we're talking about is plummeting revenue. Every single jurisdiction, including the state of Virginia, including the state of Maryland, including Montgomery County, Maryland, including Prince George's County, Maryland, Loudoun County, Prince William County, Fairfax County, Arlington and Alexandria are experiencing such revenue shortfalls. It's not about mismanagement. It's about the domino effect of the mismanagement in Washington that led to the subprime mortgage crisis, that has led to plummeting real estate values in Northern Virginia. And that has affected local budgets because in Virginia, local governments are unduly reliant on property tax revenue to finance their operations because we don't have a lot of other instruments available to us. But this is a national phenomenon, not a local phenomenon. And to try to make something else out of it, I think, is slander and irresponsible.
There is no rebuttal. Why not?
That's how it works. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, the Cleveland Browns, there was rebuttal. But Keith, I, like many of us, watching the most dramatic events since the Great Depression in terms of financial markets this week, would be struck normally by the fact that this would suggest a very unsound economy, combined with rising interest rates for mortgages until recently, unprecedented prices for gasoline, a rising unemployment rate now up to 6.1%, the dollar collapsing against the yen and other currencies, including the euro, unprecedented federal deficits, the doubling of the federal debt. All of that would suggest to some of us that all is not well with the U.S. economy. On Monday, you were on a blog and you said, "We're very blessed because we have a strong economy." That was Monday of this week. Do you still believe we're blessed with a strong economy? And if so, why?
I don't. I didn't respond to that blog. I wasn't even aware that that response was given. We don't have a strong economy. We have a serious problem, and it could be far more serious than it is. We have to make sure we control spending moving forward so that the economy remains on a strong footing and we don't imperil the generation that follows us. There are many reasons for this, but folks, I'd like to call to your attention this idea of passing off a $430 million shortfall. You've got to cut a whole bunch to make up for that. So it's 15% across the board, 20% across the board. It's a gigantic number. There are going to be many, many, many unhappy people. I don't care if every county in the country got caught short. The truth is, this is the difference between government and private enterprise. In private enterprise, you can't raise taxes. You plan wrong, you get whacked. You lose the whole thing. And we're seeing it now. The companies who are failing, the CEOs and the entire executive management teams, the whole senior management team is being let go, as well they should be. But in most cases, private enterprise plans very carefully for the scary stuff. It's what we do. We war game all the time. We have to. Folks, I just think we need that kind of planning in government. Look, you can blame the subprime crisis, you can blame county executive, you can blame President Bush, you can blame anybody you want. The truth is, you're the chairman of the board of the county, and you were caught $430 million short. That can't happen in private enterprise. So, I think this is a very relevant point, folks. I think it's highly relevant. I think it's one of the critical issues of this election.
Thank you both. Thank you both for being here tonight. I think we all really appreciate it. I actually think, they told me that 2 years ago went really well. I think this went better. I've actually enjoyed it. I think it's been comprehensive. It's covered a lot of area, and like I said, you guys answered questions. So now we're going to have closing statements. I think it's 5 minutes apiece, right, gentlemen? And since Keith, you went first, I think you'll go first here, and we'll finish with Jerry.
Well, why don't we have Jerry go first?
Yes.
Do you care, Jerry? I don't.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your hospitality. And as I said, it's great to be back with the Committee of 100 here in Prince William County. I got started, sometimes we hear phrases like career politicians thrown around. I've only actually been in elective office for 14 years. And the way I got involved in it was through my community. I had moved to Mantua, and after 1 year, they asked if I'd be president of the Civic Association. I thought, well, I've only been here 1 year. Surely you've got other people in this big community. Oh, no, it'll be easy, they said. So that was the year my wife got pregnant, and we discovered oil in Mantua. It turned out that the oil tank farm on Pickett Road in Fairfax City had for decades been leaking kerosene and oil and avjet fuel into the ground, and it created an underground plume that migrated into my community. And so instead of being an easy year, I had to deal with one of the biggest environmental crises in Northern Virginia history. When I first began as Civic Association president before we discovered oil, I was lucky to get 65 people to show up at a meeting to talk about gypsy moths. When we discovered oil, we averaged 900 people a meeting. And now people were worried about the value of their homes. People were worried about health hazards. What did it do to pregnant women? What did it do to people with compromised immune systems? What did it do to infants and young children? We had vapor buildup and had to evacuate several homes for fear of explosion. We were worried about it migrating in the storm sewer system. And what that taught me, that experience taught me, was how important it is that your government be able to respond when you need it to. In that experience, the state government failed us, the federal government failed us. The only government that cared and responded at the time was the Fairfax County government, the fire department, the health department, our elected leadership on both sides of the aisle. They worked with us to try to find a solution to help heal my community that had been so damaged by a business that didn't care. And that experience gave me the passion to decide I need to go into government to make sure this doesn't happen to other people and that their government is there when they need it. I believe the same thing applies at the federal level. Frankly, the federal government has become dysfunctional. And maybe we've even grown complacent in accepting that. Well, I'm not complacent, and I hope you aren't either. We have a right as citizens to demand that government work. It is the role of Congress as a separate but equal branch of government to ensure that that government works. And I think Congress, in this last 8-year period, has largely been missing in action in that job too. I want to bring that passion that I brought to my local government, that has been, as I said, designated the best managed in the United States. While we're talking about the turmoil in Washington and Wall Street, Fairfax County has a AAA bond rating, the highest bond rating you can get, because we don't make those risky investments. We protect and manage well the assets of our citizens on their behalf. I want to bring that passion to Washington. I want to make, or contribute to help make, the federal government functional again, because you and I deserve no less as citizens of this great country. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. God bless.
Best managed county in the country, AAA bond rating, which existed before Mr. Connolly. Folks, elections are about choices. And we have some very, very important choices coming. Our nation has never faced the kinds of threats that we face today. They're different. It doesn't mean we can't rise to meet them, but they are different. I'm a man that has real-world experience. I've created hundreds of jobs. I've negotiated deals. I've learned how to do more with less, because you have to. I've built from a room above a garage and now operate, well, I resigned, but a nationwide company. This was really hard. I've got common sense business principles I bring to government, to this job. And if we don't elect people who can deal with the kinds of problems we are facing, I'm telling you, this thing on Wall Street could be a lot worse. I don't want to frighten you, but I'm here to say we cannot keep doing what we're doing. It is why I've decided to run. My oldest daughter is the sweetest young woman you've ever met. She's very smart. She works in Manhattan for JP Morgan, doing futures, derivatives, and options. I can't even pronounce half of what she does. But she said to me, "Dad, why are you doing this? You don't need to do this." And I told her, I said, "I'm doing this for you and for your sisters. Because I know if people like me who can do this don't do this, this country will not be for our kids what it was for us." It's one thing to say you can do something. It's another thing to be able to do it. We have some very hard choices to make, people. And it's not going to be easy. You need people who don't want to get reelected time after time and just see themselves up there, building bridges to nowhere, sacrificing everything to get back in office. We need people who can make some very, very difficult choices. People who are smart and seasoned and experienced. And look, I may not be the #1 choice for that, but I know what I'm doing. I know business really well. And I know how to do more with less. And I know how to make tough choices. And that is what we most need from our elected leaders, because they don't. They get into these positions and all they care about is getting reelected. And it's very, very bad for our country. So, one issue I'd like to address, because I think this is the issue, this shortfall, the lack of planning that occurred so that it happened, okay? The lack of planning, wherever, whatever county, the lack of planning that occurred. It doesn't happen in the private sector. But I'd like to address one thing, because I think that's the issue, and there are others that are relevant to you, the voters. My name has been smeared. There have been a number of mailings about me that are saying that they're totally false. I'm a member of a group of Catholic CEOs and business owners called Legatus. It's a wonderful organization. It's a 501c3. They don't have a political position on anything. It's a social group. You meet once a month, have dinner, and hear a speaker. And yet, because of my association with that organization, they have links to other websites on their website. But they say specifically that Legatus does not endorse any other organization or anything on any of their sites, which is pretty typical. But if you drill down on some of these other sites, you find things that I'm now responsible for. Apparently, I'm in favor of women being submissive to their husbands. Well, folks, talk to my wife and my daughters. I mean, I love these people dearly, but I'm now responsible for wanting to legislate contraception. These are lies. These are dirty lies. How do you get your reputation back? I'm against stem cell research. Folks, I am strongly in favor of stem cell research, just not embryonic, for 3 reasons. It shows no promise. Number 2, there are millions of people that object to it because of the moral implications. And number 3, when you have pluripotent skin cells that show gigantic promise, why would you be against stem cell research? They've actually equated it to the Wright brothers' first manned flight. It's so significant. So with that, why would I be against stem cell? My opponent knows this, and yet he has stated on television that I'm against it. So look, I just want this election to be about the issues, and I would ask that you please help me ensure that that happens. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and I thank you for listening.